Revive family, I hope you're all doing well and staying safe. A couple announcements before we jump into our Devo for this week is that we will be having our Zoom meeting this Saturday at 2 p.m. All the information is the same as last time, but again, it will be in the weekly email in case you need that again as well. This week we are continuing our series on families past, present, and future. And this week we'll be taking a look about grief and mourning and how God enters into those situations and redeems them and also brings us into a deeper connection with one another. A couple of things before diving into the Devo. One, I just want to clarify that grief and mourning are very similar, but they are different in a slight way. So grief is the feeling of loss, kind of like the internal emotions, whereas mourning is sort of working through those emotions. It's kind of like the expression of that grief. And I know this is a heavy and multifaceted topic, so by no means is this a comprehensive look or only way to look at it. And everyone's process is different, and so this Devo is kind of based on my own process and my own experience. And so it may look very similar, it may look very different from yours. So I just wanted to preface that before we kind of dive into this topic. That being said, I think we can all agree that this year has looked very different than we thought it was going to look like. And in some ways, we've all experienced loss. Now, maybe it's not something physical, like losing a family member or a friend or a pet, but it could also be something that, we normally wouldn't think about losing, like losing a house or a job. And it can also be something that's not physical, having to give up, hopes and dreams about the future or hopes and dreams you had for someone else. A loss of a tradition, right? We weren't able to meet how we normally meet for Thanksgiving, and maybe you had to mourn the fact that you weren't going to see certain family members or be able to do certain things. With quarantine, it could feel like a loss of time or, that time's just slipping you by. And, maybe some of these losses, they weren't that big of a deal for you. And so you were able to be at peace with those decisions and able to, kind of let those things go. But also maybe some of those losses were a little bit harder and you had to process through that. Instead of just talking about these feelings, I wanted to kind of do it in a different way, I guess. So I wrote a short piece. It's 2 letters, and one of them is from the perspective of the emotions that you might feel when going through loss or mourning. And that's anger, guilt, and fear. It's kind of contrasted with another letter, and that's from God, and it's in the perspective of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And so in a moment, I'm going to ask you to pause the video and get your handout. So it should be linked below. You can also find it on our church website under Revive and our Devos, or it's also linked in our weekly email as well, so you can all find it there. And I just want to clarify something before we jump into this. I'm not saying that feeling these feelings or even grief is bad, but I just kind of wanted to showcase how these emotions can manifest negatively and how the enemy can use that to kind of entangle you and process through your loss in a more negative way, and how God steps into that, redeems those situations, and how to process our loss in a more healthy and growing way. Okay, so get your handout, kind of read over the 2 letters, and then kind of compare and contrast what, those emotions are saying versus what's God saying, and how, kind of the differences and the similarities. Okay, so I hope the story made sense or the letters made sense. I just kind of want to talk a little bit more about the background and the ideas and the intent behind those 2 letters. So I kind of wrote the letters as kind of 2 main purposes. One is to maybe give you some kind of context and maybe even some words to how, if you experienced a loss, how you may be feeling or how these emotions and these thoughts can manifest in negative ways versus what God may be trying to tell you and how he can grow you and encounter you in positive ways. And the second purpose is maybe you aren't experiencing a loss, but you know someone who is or is going to encounter someone who is. Maybe reading over those feelings and those thoughts you're able to connect with them better because you're able to understand maybe what they're going through or what they're experiencing. And so there are many different emotions that we can experience when we go through a great loss. And I'm not saying that those are the only three, but I feel like for me at least, those are the three that are most common. And I think a lot of times when you go through a great loss, we get tangled up in our emotions that sometimes we can't see what God's doing. We take some of our own emotions and take it for truth when really God's speaking something else. And so I kind of wanted to showcase how those two things are different sometimes. And sometimes they are similar, but in one context, it's different than versus the other context. And I want to also clarify that when I say great loss, I don't mean it has to be like a big loss, like a loss of a family member or a friend, but it could be something as small as like, I lost a necklace that had a lot of importance to me, and to someone else that may not be a big deal, but to you that's a big deal. So loss can come in many different forms, and I don't want you to feel confined or even ashamed, even if it's something as little as like a necklace. But it's not necessarily the thing that we're losing, but maybe the importance or the significance behind it. So you may be feeling all these emotions, but then really God is coming in to our situation, and He's walking alongside us, and He walks alongside us in the process. And so the idea of them having them side by side is to also showcase how God transforms and even combats those feelings and redeems the situation. And so He brings us into a place of safety and of healing and of growth. And so instead of guilt and shame, we're now experiencing acceptance and forgiveness. And instead of fear, we're experiencing peace. Like I mentioned in the beginning, this Devo is largely based on my own experiences with mourning and with grief, and I feel like it's unfair if I don't share that experience. So I guess an example in my life where God had to walk me through my mourning process was with the passing of my grandpa on my mom's side. His name was Ray. My grandpa and I were very close. My sister and I spent every weekend at his house, and we pretty much lived there the summer. And so I think some of the best memories were at his house, and he was definitely one of my biggest supporters and one of my inspirations and role models in life. And so towards the end of his life, he had pancreatic cancer, and a few months before my graduation from high school, he passed. And soon after that, we actually had to sell his house. And that was probably the hardest loss I've had to experience so far. And to say the least, I was devastated. I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to go to school. And I just remember being really sad, and I went through those three emotions. I was really angry for a while. I was angry at God because I thought I had more time with Him, and I really felt like, He was saying that I had more time with Him, and so I was angry at Him for that, and I was angry at myself because, I was getting close to graduation, and I wasn't really focusing on, my grandpa, and I had a lot of guilt and a lot of shame. I went through all the shoulda, coulda, wouldas, what ifs. Like, I should have called him more. I should have spent more time with him. I shouldn't have been so focused on myself. I could have called him more often. And so I even went through a lot of, even fear of like, what does, life look like without him? And so, I had to not only mourn him, but I also had to mourn the loss of his house, which was like one of my childhood homes. I had to even mourn the hopes and dreams I had. Some of them, were that, my grandpa, being one of my biggest supporters, was gonna, be there to celebrate with me in my graduation, when I got married, all those things. I had to mourn those hopes and dreams that I had. I had to spend a lot of time praying and processing with God and wrestling with God about, my doubts of, hearing Him, my anger with Him. And, it took me a while before I could process even with others. And, some days were harder than others, and I just had to keep going back to God, keep sitting with Him, keep wrestling with Him. And, the more I sat with God, the more I healed, the more I saw God enter into those places and even redeem those places of emptiness, of loss, of hurt even. I even got to see how God, redeemed the situation, and how blessed I was to have, my grandpa for so long. And even one of the biggest things that I feel like God revealed to me was how he really did perform a miracle. My grandpa, he was Buddhist growing up, and I just remember from the beginning, from where I just, could barely talk, I would pray for him every single night that he would accept Christ. And when I was little, he didn't really want to talk about God or anything. So actually on his birthday, the year that he passed, which was on March 21st, 2015, which was also just a few months before my graduation, he actually accepted Christ and was baptized on that day. And I'm just always reminded and blown away by the fact that God redeemed my grandpa. It was one of those things that I always prayed for, I always wished for, but I just didn't think was going to happen. And that is a miracle in itself. I think I'm just reminded about how lucky I am that I got to see that before he passed, because it was only just a month or two before he actually passed. And even from that experience of losing my grandpa, I was able to, come alongside people who've also lost someone they've loved, and just sit with them and process with them and share my experiences with them. And through that, I'm able to just see how that experience, as tough as it was, I was able to build connection and come alongside people who are also going through that. So as we go into Christmas and the new year, for those who are experiencing loss and are going through mourning, a few things I just want to say to you. 1, God is with you and he redeems everything. 2, you have a community here that loves you and is here for you. 3, it's okay to not be okay. And it's better to be honest and to, confront those feelings and not bottle it up. It's just going to come up one way or another. And 4, there is no shame in asking for help. Our values are authenticity, vulnerability, belonging, and freedom, and we want you to encompass all those things. There is no shame in wanting to feel free, to feel whole again. And lastly, everyone's timeline is different, so there is no shame in taking longer time and other people taking shorter time. It's been 5-ish years now since the passing of my grandpa, and I still have yet to delete his contact off my phone, and I still have a voicemail from him that I just, I don't know if I'd ever be able to listen to it without crying, but it's something I'm still working through, still processing through. Sometimes things just come up, and I think it takes time to process through all these emotions, especially when it's something that, really hits you to your core. So yeah, I recognize that, and I am still working through that. God works with us and is patient, and if you need all the time in the world, then he has all that time in the world for you. And maybe you aren't experiencing loss during this time, but you know someone who is, or you're gonna hang out with someone who is. I think it's also important to know that it's okay to not know what to say or what to do. A lot of times it's just being present and being with the person that matters. Some of the best text I received during that time was from friends who were like, I don't know what to say and I can't relate to what you're going through, but just know that I'm here for you. And if you ever need anything, then I'm there. And that was the best response, in my opinion, that anyone could have sent to me. Just knowing that they're there, even if, they didn't know how to respond or what to say. And just don't be judgmental. Again, everyone's on a different timeline. Everyone processes everything differently. We're all working through that process. We're all trying to grow, and, there will be some growing pains and there will be some differences. And so, it's important to just accept and love on the person and just be present with them. So a few reflection questions for this week. How have you experienced loss, and how have you processed through that or are processing through that? And again, it doesn't have to be something of a great loss like a family member, friend, a pet, a house, a job. It could be something like losing tradition, a loss of time, a loss of identity, a loss of a feeling. 2 is how can we come alongside those who are mourning? And maybe you know people who are going through loss and maybe you don't, but how can we create a sense of community, grow together, and come alongside those within our community to help them process and grow and just feel loved and accepted during this time. And 3, how is God redeeming our situation for His glory? He is in the midst of all this and He encounters us within our process and He redeems the situation. So I know this is a heavy topic and it's a very vulnerable topic, and so I just want to thank you all for going there with me this week. And just know that you don't have to do this alone. We are here for you, and if this is something that is really weighing heavy on your heart, our Revive Core staff as well as our prayer team are here for you. So if you do need prayer or would like someone to just sit with you and to listen, we are here for you. So you can either fill out the prayer request form that's within our emails, or you can also just email back to our Revive email as well. Either way, we would love to come alongside you. And finally, I just want to pray over you all. So I just pray wherever you are, whatever you're going through, that the Lord reveals Himself to you and for peace and love to be over you. And I pray that He meets you within your processing and that you are reminded that you are loved, you are seen, and you are valued. So I pray all these things in the precious Father's name. Amen. Thank you all for coming alongside me in my own journey, and I hope to see you all this Saturday again at 2 p.m. for our Revive Zoom meeting. Have a great rest of your week.